y'all, I've got a few equations here I wanted to work through with you. We started talking about solving equations by using the square root method today, and we did pretty well. I know there were still some questions, so we are not finished practicing those. But until then, I wanted to go ahead and post this video so you could go back and look at it for reference later. One of the things we talked about today was when you're solving an equation like this, there's one thing you want to do for sure, and that is to isolate the squared term. So I want to remind you of that. Now, the squared term can look like x squared. It can look like x minus 1 quantity squared. It can look like different things. After you've done that, you want to square root both sides. And then we need to make sure that we are paying attention to what happens as far as what kind of answers we will get, plus or minus, that kind of thing. So this first example I've got right here is not one that's particularly hard, but we just want to start with the basics. Isolate the squared term. X squared is the squared term. It is by itself on one side of the equal sign. So that's what that implies. Get the isolate the x squared term, get it on one side of the equal sign by itself. And then everything else needs to be on the other side of the equal sign. Once you have that done, it is safe to go ahead and square root both sides. When you do that, remember that x squared means there's a possibility of two solutions. X is going to be a positive square root 56 or even a negative square root of 56. Now, why do we have this extra step here? Because the square root of 56 is able to be simplified. If you were to look at the factor tree, it would break down into 4 and 14, and then 4 would break down a little bit more, meaning that you need to take out the 2 outside of the radical. Why does this question not have an I in the answer? There is no negative on the 56 when I take the square root. So we just have these two answers of positive 2 square root 14 and negative 2 square root 14. The next one is a little bit harder, actually quite a bit harder. You want to isolate the squared term. What is a squared term? X squared. All right, we want to get that by itself. So I want you to remember when you are solving a regular old equation in Algebra 1 without the squared, you would add 5 first, divide by 7. We're going to do the same thing. If you add 5 on both sides, 23 plus 5 is 28. Now I've got 7x squared equals 28. Divide by 7. I know they're not showing the work there, but I'm pretty sure you should be able to follow along still with what's going on. If you divide both sides by 7, x squared is now equal to 4. Now, the first thing you need to do, the first goal in solving an equation like this is to get the squared term by itself on one side of the equal sign, and you have accomplished that. Now, x squared is by itself. So it's time to square root both sides, just like we have this here. When you take the square root of both sides, you need a plus or minus on your answer. Another way that you can write this would be x is equal to a negative 2 and a positive 2 or vice versa. So you could write your answer actually like the way I've just typed it out on your screen as well. And that shows both solutions. I actually prefer what I wrote in braces over there other than what was shown on the screen. All right, here's one more. Now, this is the one that is a little bit tricky because after you've isolated your squared stuff or your squared term, you're not finished, a few steps later. So you've got x minus 7, and if the parentheses are around x and another number, we say it's x minus 7 quantity squared. Now, that is the squared term because it's parentheses and has a square on it. So it is already isolated. I cannot touch this minus 7 until that square is gone. I just can't. So you are ready to square root both sides, and that's what has been done. So the square root of both sides, it's gone now on the left. It's just x minus 7. You could drop those parentheses as well. That is equal to plus or minus, because after you take the square root of both sides, that next step should have a plus or minus on the number on the right. Always, just like it did on this other one up here. So right here. After you take the square root of x squared, the next step, there is a plus or minus on that number. All right, we've got to do that every time. So the square root of a 81 is a nice, pretty 9, and it's a plus or minus 9. So here's what was tripping everybody up today. When you get to this step, usually you're finished, but there's still that minus 7 hanging out over there. We got to get rid of it. So we're going to add 7 to both sides. And so that's why it looks like 7 plus or minus 9. Now, normally what we did in class today when we got to that step is we did not write it like that. We wrote it as plus or minus 9. I'm trying to figure out how to show this without pulling up equation editor. Okay, so plus or minus 9 plus 7, but it means the same thing as it is written here. It's just written with a number first. It looks a little bit neater like this. So when you get here, this is something that can be simplified because it's saying two things. It's saying that x is equal to a positive 9 or 7, whichever one you would look at first. If you look at it the way it's here, we would actually say 7 plus 9, and x is also equal to a positive 7 minus 9. All right, so normally what we would have done is, if we had done it the way we did in the class today, we usually leave the plus or minus item first. We would have done 9 plus 7, and then we would have done negative 9 plus 7. But you're going to see that those are exactly the same. All right, either way you add them up, what are we going to get for this first one? We're going to get 16. Either it's 7 plus 9 or 9 plus 7. And then on the second half here, 7 minus 9 or negative 9 plus 7, same thing, is a negative 2. When you solve for these questions that have quantity squared, you are going to get two answers that are two different numbers because of the way the equation is set up. When you solve these questions that just have an x squared, you're not going to have that sort of outcome because you're not having to go an additional step after you take the square root. That is normal. Just know that there are a variety of things that can happen. Use what you know about algebra and you'll get it done and it'll be good.